Okay, so welcome everyone to our PHU immunisation catch-up. I'd like to start by acknowledging, with an acknowledgement of country, sorry. So I'd like to acknowledge the traditional custodians of the land on which we meet today and pay my respects to elders past, present and future, for they hold the memories, the traditions, the culture and hopes of Aboriginal Australia. So if you have any questions throughout the session, please pop them in the chat and I'll monitor the chat. And if we have time, we'll try to answer them at the end. As you can appreciate, if you can, we would appreciate if you can complete the evaluation form that will open up when you leave the session, just so that we can ensure we're continuing to provide the relevant information for you. And I'll hand over now to Emily to get started.
Okay, can everyone see my presentation now?
Not yet, no.
Oh. Sorry. What about now?
Yes.
Okay, great. All right, thank you. So thanks for that welcome, Amy. So I think most of you might know that I'm Emily. I'm one of the public health nurses from Metro North Public Health Unit. So we're just going to do a quick sort of update session today for a few relevant topics, including flu. So as Amy said, maybe if you just could reserve your questions to the end and I'll try and answer them, and anything I can't answer, I'll take on notice and get back to you. Okay. So we'll just talk about the influenza vaccines. One small slide about COVID, the change to the HPV schedule, and a little bit about some vaccination rates and re-emerging diseases that we're currently seeing as well. So this slide is probably quite a bit of revision for you. So essentially, there's a number of different virus types when it comes to influenza, but A and B are the ones that actually cause disease in humans. This year, the data is showing that flu A is more dominant, so more notifications of flu A versus flu B. And if you are interested in this data, there is weekly influenza surveillance that's published on the Queensland Health website if you're interested to have a look at what the flu notifications are looking like and what the distribution of A versus B type is. The reason why we need a slightly different vaccine each year is that those proteins on the outside of the virus mutate all the time. And so we need to change the vaccine to accommodate for that. But also, this is why we know that influenza has what's called pandemic potential. It's also something that's very easily spread through large droplets. And can be also sitting on surfaces or what we call fomites as well, and then be passed on to onto the human through their nose and mouth. The infectious period is from 24 hours before symptoms start and then 1 week after the start of the symptoms. And obviously influenza is spread more easily when there's large numbers of people gathering. So that's why we didn't really see much influenza during the COVID pandemic, but because we sort of were kept quite separate from each other and there was periods of lockdown and things like that. This year, the Southern Hemisphere strains are included in this slide. So we've got, as we usually have, 2A and 2B. So this is obviously also based on the Northern Hemisphere experience with flu. And the egg-based versus cell-based viruses can differ because the one virus can't be used in the production of both of those different vaccines. So different viruses with similar properties are selected for one versus the other. Okay, so vaccination is the most important measure that we have for preventing influenza and its complications. And as everyone knows, I think it's recommended for people 6 months of age and above. However, it's not necessarily funded for everybody. So we just need to check that funding eligibility when you have your patients come in. Flu vaccine is particularly important for those obviously at risk, and we'll go through that shortly. The next stop point is about vaccines will be available from April. Hopefully everybody's got their first tranche or their first round of flu vaccines. The only exception to that would be if you had a cold chain breach or something like that at the time that the initial delivery was due, and then perhaps there has been some delay, but otherwise everybody should have their first lot of flu vaccines. Importantly, as it was the case last year, you can give influenza and COVID vaccines on the same day. Just another reminder about air reporting. And on the government-funded program, Fluad Quad is the funded vaccine for 65 years and over. Just in last year, we did see a bit of a resurgence of the flu virus circulating because we opened, obviously, the international borders. And there is an expectation that this year that sort of situation will continue, and we need to really emphasise the importance of vaccination. So this is a table taken directly from the ATAGI statement on seasonal influenza for this year. And it shows both the NIPS fund and also the privately funded flu vaccines. So I believe that privately funded flu vaccines are also available at the moment. So these are all of the vaccines registered in Australia and the age group indicated for each vaccine. It's just a handy guide for you to have if you're also giving private vaccines as well in your practice. So there's often questions around the timing of influenza vaccines, and I think this year we've probably got some really good, clear recommendations around timing of vaccines. So as in previous years, consideration should be given for people who are travelling internationally, and they should have the 2023 vaccine before departure. The handbook has been a little bit updated as well and has advice around this particular situation as well. And it says that, that Australians who have received the Southern Hemisphere vaccine and are travelling later in the year to the Northern Hemisphere during the flu season may receive a second dose of influenza vaccine in the same year. So remember previously we weren't necessarily recommending vaccines in the same year, although it was a risk-based decision with GPs and patients. But it's a little more clear now that you can receive a second dose in the same year. Still a sort of a case-by-case thing where the GP might consider individual risk and that sort of thing as well. The vaccine should be given before the commencement of the flu season. It should be continued to be offered as long as influenza is still around and the vaccine is within date. Pregnant women should receive the vaccine at any stage. The next dot point is probably a little bit more clarity around pregnant women as well. So if women who receive the influenza vaccine before becoming pregnant, revaccination is recommended during the pregnancy to maximise the protection of the mother and the infant in the first 6 months of life. So that information is on the Australian Government Department of Health website and also the ATAGI recommendations. We do know that from recent research, recommendation from a healthcare worker is a key factor in the uptake of flu in pregnancy. So don't underestimate the importance of your role in promoting influenza vaccine to your pregnant patients. It's really, really vital. Your role is really vital in that. You've probably seen these resources that have come from the Commonwealth. Really nice set of resources. This part of it is about eligibility. So we have pregnant women, it's very similar to last year, the eligibility. So pregnant women at any stage of pregnancy, children and adults 6 months and over with medical conditions, and children 6 months and less than 5 years, people aged 65 years and older, and Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people 6 months and over. And in the second part of that slide, it talks about the different medical conditions that put you at higher risk of influenza. and for which you would be eligible to receive a government-funded vaccine. So this is similar to the other little table that we showed before, but this is just the National Immunisation Program, the funded program vaccine, influenza vaccines, and it shows which vaccine you can give to which age group. I guess just a note here that young children aged 6 months to less than 9 years who haven't received a flu vaccine in previous years should have 2 doses at least 4 weeks apart. So that's only in the first year. So if they've already received a vaccine last year and they had only had 1, we don't sort of go backwards and give them 2. We just continue on with just 1. But if you know it's their first year, you should give them 2 doses 4 weeks apart. Just a note about the 65 years and over, we have already seen a few errors in this space. So we sort of thought perhaps that it would be a good idea to sort of try and you're probably already doing this, but to store these vaccines perhaps on a separate shelf. And one of the other things we thought of is perhaps when you're asking their date of birth, you could also ask their age, and that might be a trigger for you sort of not to give the vaccine if they sort of say their age is 62, for example. A lot of this is just a reminder. So flu vaccine can be given intramuscularly, but it's usually intramuscularly, but it can be given subcut as well. All flu vaccines available in Australia can be given with any other vaccine. There is a bit of a caveat in one of the other slides that I'll talk to you about that as well, but overall, all flu vaccines can be given with any other vaccine. And just another reminder about making sure that all doses are recorded on air. So not much has really changed in terms of vaccine safety for influenza vaccines. So as it has been the case for some time, egg allergy is not a contraindication to giving influenza vaccines. If there is some concern though, we just do recommend, or the handbook does recommend, to stay in the waiting area for just a little bit longer than the usual 15 minutes that is usually recommended. Obviously, if there's some real issues or concerns from either the provider or the parent, there are specialist immunisation clinics that you can refer to. So previously we have had some issues with latex allergy in previous years around influenza vaccines, but that is not the case this year. All of the vaccines in the NIP schedule in 2023 are latex free, so there's no issue with vaccinating anybody with a latex allergy. And just a reminder that all adverse events following immunisation should be made through the usual reporting mechanisms. So in other words, that's just using an AFI form that's on the Queensland Government website, or you can make notifications directly onto the TGA website as well. So sometimes I think there is still that sort of circulating belief out in the community that the vaccine can cause the flu, but of course that is not the case. It doesn't contain any live virus and can't cause the flu. It is quite common though to see some mild flu-like symptoms within the 48 hours post vaccination, and that's sort of fairly normal. Any sort of serious reactions to the vaccines are really rare. It's usually those sort of short-lived side effects such as pain, swelling in the injection site, and sometimes sort of flu-like symptoms. So I've just included one more slide about vaccine safety. So this is an update to the recommendations, I believe, from last year. So this one is included, I think, because often in the age group that you give Fluad Quad, you might also be giving Shingrix, although appreciate that that's not currently funded on the schedule. Some patients may choose to pay for that. So just to note that the Fluad Quad and Shingrix is there's just not a lot of data around the co-administration of these two vaccines. So you can co-administer them, but I guess the preference is for them to be, their administration to be separated by a few days. just because we don't have a great deal of data on the co-administration of these vaccines. Okay. Just important note about storing the vaccines. So it's really important to make sure that you have enough fridge capacity to accommodate the flu vaccines, as well as your usual NIPS schedule vaccines and any private vaccines that you might store on site as well. All vaccines must be stored in their original packaging, stored separate according to age, and flu vaccines separate from other vaccines. And just to note that it's really important to make sure that there's still plenty of air circulation around the vaccines, and that you're still using the fenestrated baskets so that you can continue to achieve consistent and stable temperatures. So we just don't want situations where overstocking occurs and all of the vaccines are pushed towards the back of the fridge or to the side. This can cause lots of issues with the vaccines and stable temperatures not being maintained. Okay. I've just included one slide about the COVID-19 booster. We do get a few calls about this one. So this table is straight out of the ATAGI booster advice, and hopefully it might be a little bit helpful in determining whether or not someone is indicated or recommended for a vaccine. I just thought I would include this because it might be a little bit helpful in kind of trying to work out whether someone should have a vaccine or not. So at the moment, the booster dose is not recommended for children and adolescents under 18 who don't have any severe sort of risk factors. I think everyone would be fairly familiar to the change in the HPV recommendations. So earlier in the year, I think it was February, the federal government announced a change to the schedule. So just one dose now in the school immunisation program. One dose is free for children in that sort of grade 7 age group from sort of 12 to 13 years. And obviously GP practice have a really big role in any catch-up for young people. So anyone that's had one dose doesn't need any further doses, and the handbook, it does speak to that. They've updated the handbook. The only difference to that is those people who are immunocompromised or those over 26 years. Now, the handbook says that people over 26 years are not routinely recommended to have the HPV vaccine, but obviously risk-benefit analysis can be undertaken on a case-by-case basis with the GP. Just to note that people who are immunocompromised still require those three doses. Okay, so the next few slides are actually about some situations that we're experiencing around the world with regard to new and emerging communicable diseases or re-emerging diseases. So I thought this was relevant because it just really reinforces the importance of making sure that your patients are up to date with their vaccines or their immunisations, and the vital role that primary care can play in this. So since the pandemic, we have seen an increase in delayed and missed vaccinations globally with, really big declines in rates of some vaccinations. It's a combination of, in some sort of, not necessarily in Australia, but in some countries, a combination of issues with access and equity in terms of vaccination during the pandemic, but also research has showed that parents are now a little more likely to hold negative perceptions against vaccines and be more concerned about vaccinating their children. The Commonwealth have advised that they will sort of run a bit of a promotional campaign to remind parents of the importance of childhood vaccination. So watch out for that. And just a reminder as well that we do have the SKAI resources available, which is a National Immunisation Research and Surveillance Resources to support providers to talk about vaccination or immunisation with their patients. So I've put measles first because I'm sure you're probably aware that it's quite topical at the moment. There has been measles outbreaks in Europe and the US, most recently in the US. It's just really, really important at the moment to make sure patients are up to date, especially if travelling overseas. So as you're aware, children can receive MMR doses from 6 months of age, but they'll still need subsequent doses when they return to Australia at their usual scheduled points of 12 and 18 months. Doses given from 11 months, though, would be considered to be valid, but anything sort of less than that, they would need 2 subsequent doses. So we've been advised recently from the immunisation program that all of those doses would be funded. So if you gave a child an MMR dose at 7 months of age because they were travelling overseas, that would be funded, and the 2 subsequent doses as per the schedule would also be funded. I've just put a couple of links there with some interesting information about measles. And then I just wanted to bring your attention, you may have already seen these alerts. So one is dated March and the most recent one is dated the 14th of April. And this is about measles cases essentially in our local area in the Sunshine Coast region. There's also been cases of measles, you may be aware, in Sydney more recently. That's been publicised. So this is a real issue. This is a topical issue. We are seeing cases. So really, really important to make sure everybody's up to date with their vaccinations. Everybody, not just children as well. Now, just a note on this as well, if you suspect a case of measles, please contact the Public Health Unit. The Public Health Act does list measles as notifiable on clinical suspicion as well. Okay, so just a point about polio as well. There has been cases of polio in Canada and Israel for the first time in many years. Also, detection of polio in the UK for the first time in a long time. We think it's to do with under-vaccinated populations globally. International travel, again, another reason to ensure that patients are up to date with their vaccinations, especially if they're travelling. I just thought I'd add a slide about diphtheria. So I'm not sure if anybody is aware that there has been an outbreak of cutaneous and pharyngeal diphtheria, primarily in North Queensland, that started last year. Last year, there was also 2 cases of diphtheria in New South Wales reported in unvaccinated children. And what we think is that this is likely to have developed locally rather than being imported. Again, another dot point just to reinforce, it's really important to make sure that your patients are up to date, especially if they are travelling. So I've just, that is the end of the presentation. I've just got a couple of resources there that might be of use to you. There's some new resources about flu vaccination and working and talking with Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander families about flu. Just a reminder as well that we've got our online immunisation courses that are free on the Queensland Health Immunisation website, and all of the information that's on the slides today can be found on the NCIRS, the ATAGI advice, or the Queensland Health vaccination guidelines for this year. Okay, any questions?
Well, first of all, thanks. Can you hear me? Sorry, Emily.
Yes, thank you, Amy.
That's all right. So I wish to apologise to everyone. We've actually started earlier than we were supposed to. So, but don't despair. Like it's being recorded. You will get a copy of the recording so you can catch up on what you missed from the beginning. There are no questions in the chat at this stage that I can see. So, yeah, if there are no more, Helen's raised her hand. I don't know that you can, I think it's on mute, Helen. Are you able to, hold on a sec, I'll let you talk, Colin.